My name is Elena Marsh, and 3 years ago I stood on an airport tarmac in a white silk dress watching my husband's secretary sink into my seat on his private jet. He looked at me through the window. He didn't stop her. He just gave me a small tired smile like I was the problem. Smiled back. I turned around and I walked away. What he didn't know was that the plane he was sitting on was mine. And in exactly 9 minutes, it wasn't going anywhere. 4 years earlier I married Daniel Marsh, a rising CEO with a talent for charm and a bigger talent for taking credit. Everyone at his company called it Daniel's empire. What almost nobody knew was that the original seed money, the private jet, the beach house, all of it traced back to a holding company I owned under my maiden name. I never talked about it. I liked being underestimated. It made people show their true selves faster. I ran my part of things quietly from a small office 2 floors below his. To most employees, I was just Mrs. Marsh, the wife who sometimes brought coffee to board meetings. Daniel liked it that way. He said modesty suited me. Really, he liked being the only name people remembered. That year, the company had its best quarter ever. Daniel decided to celebrate with something big. A company-wide reward trip. The entire senior team flown out to a resort in the Bahamas. All expenses paid on the company's private jet. My jet. He announced it in a meeting I wasn't even invited to. I found out about the trip from a calendar invite his assistant forgot to hide. At dinner that night, I asked him gently, "Am I coming on the trip?" He barely looked up from his phone. "Of course you are, don't be dramatic." But something in his voice felt rehearsed, like he'd already answered that question in his head differently to someone else. 2 days before the flight, I overheard him on a call in his office. The door wasn't fully closed. "There's only so many seats," he said. "I'll figure it out. Don't worry about Elena. Don't worry about Elena." Like I was luggage that might not fit. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I've learned that people who are about to betray you always tell you first in small ways before they do it in big ones. I just listened. I watched and I waited to see if he would prove me wrong. He didn't. The morning of the flight, I arrived at the private terminal in a white dress, my bag already checked in days earlier, my name already on the manifest because it was, after all, my plane. I walked toward the stairs, and that's when I saw her. Priya, his secretary, 26 years old, already seated in 2A. My seat, the one I always sat in. Daniel stood at the top of the stairs. And for 1 second our eyes met. He knew I was standing there. He knew that seat was mine. And instead of fixing it, instead of saying one single word, he just gave me that tired, apologetic smile. The one that meant, "Please don't make a scene." I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. Not sadness exactly, more like clarity. I had spent 4 years quietly protecting a man who, the moment it was inconvenient, would let someone else take my place without even blinking. So I smiled back at him. A real smile, calm and warm, the kind that confuses people because it doesn't match the moment. I turned around. I walked back across the tarmac and I got in my car. I didn't cry in that car. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, confirming something I already knew. The aircraft, the tail number, the entire flight operations company belonged to my holding company, not Daniel's business. He flew on it because I let him every single trip. The second call was to the flight operations manager, a woman named Carol, who had worked for me for 6 years and had never once needed me to explain myself twice. "Ground the flight," I said. "Effective immediately." She didn't ask why. She just said, "Understood, Mrs. Marsh." This wasn't rage. I want to be clear about that. I didn't do this because I was jealous of a 26-year-old in my seat. I did it because I finally saw in one small moment everything Daniel had been showing me for years. That when it came down to it, he would always choose comfort over loyalty. And I was done being the person who absorbed that. 9 minutes after I drove away, the flight crew received the order. I know exactly what happened next because Carol told me every detail afterward. The lead flight attendant walked calmly up the aisle, stopped beside Daniel's seat, and said loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, "Sir, we've been instructed to ground this aircraft." She turned toward Priya, still sitting in my seat. "Ma'am, should we cancel the flight or would you like to deplane first?" Silence. 20 senior executives all watching. Daniel stood up so fast he hit his head on the overhead bin. "There must be a mistake," he said. "This is my flight." The flight attendant very politely informed him that the aircraft was registered under Marsh Aviation Holdings, and the standing order for the day had just come directly from the owner. Someone in the back, one of the younger VPs, asked quietly, "Wait, his wife owns the plane?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. 20 people who worked for him, who respected him, watched him try to explain something he clearly didn't understand himself. That was the moment he lost more than a flight. He lost the story he'd been telling everyone, including himself, about who really built what they had. Daniel called me 11 times before I finally picked up. I let him talk. He apologized badly at first. All excuses about pressure and scheduling and how Priya needed to be there for logistics. Then slowly, more honestly, he admitted he'd been careless with me for a long time, not just that day. He said he assumed I'd always just adjust, bend, make room. I told him the truth. I wasn't angry about a seat. I was done being someone's afterthought while quietly holding up half his life. 2 weeks later we separated. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no more scenes to make because I'd already made the only one that mattered calmly on a tarmac in the sun. The company didn't collapse without him, and it didn't collapse without me either. But something did shift. People at that office stopped calling it Daniel's empire. They started asking who Mrs. Marsh actually was. And slowly, I stopped being the quiet name behind someone else's success and started being simply mine. Priya, for the record, resigned within the month. Not because I asked her to. She just realized, I think, exactly what kind of man would let another woman take a seat that clearly wasn't hers to take. Here's what I learned standing on that tarmac. You don't always need to shout to be heard. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is smile, turn around, and simply stop showing up for people who never truly made room for you. Daniel didn't lose that day because I was cruel. He lost because he finally had to face in front of everyone a truth he'd been avoiding for years. That everything he thought was his was only ever there because someone quieter than him chose to give it. If someone in your life keeps assuming you'll shrink to fit their convenience, ask yourself this. What would happen if just once you stopped adjusting? Sometimes the answer isn't revenge. Sometimes it's simply the truth finally allowed to land. If this story meant something to you, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a quiet moment like that where you finally stopped bending for someone else? I'd love to hear it.